Today is Saturday, August 28th, 2021. My name is Dr. Regina Williams, and I am the founder and director of the A. Grace Lee Mims Arts and Culture Oral History Project. Thank you so much for agreeing to be part of our project.
Thanks for having me.
Well, I'll just go ahead and get started then, working with the list that I shared with you a little earlier, and ask you to begin our dialogue today by stating your name and your affiliations, because I know you're super busy.
My name is Theresa May. I'm a musician and educator in the city of Cleveland. I play trumpet with the Cleveland Jazz Orchestra and also my father's big band, Gabriel's Horns. I teach world music and applied trumpet at the Kahala Community College and John Carroll University as well. And I also recently started a new organization called the Chromatic Brass Collective. And I think lastly, I also play with the group called Morning A Black Star.
So, Professor May, can you please tell me a little bit about your early life, including your parents' names, where you were born, where you grew up, and what schools you attended?
Yep, I am the youngest of two. I have an older brother named James May. My father is James May, and my mother is Chestana May. I started playing trumpet because of my father. He is a trumpet player and educator as well. And I remember in church and after church, he would play, well, he kind of played everything in church. He played trumpet and then he would hop on the drum set and play drums. And he also played piano. So I would just always try to play trumpet and pick up and mess with his instruments. I think he finally just got tired of me always bothering his instruments and knew I wanted to play. And he taught me to play trumpet or cornet at the time. And then ever since then, I just loved trumpet and cornet in particular and music as a whole. So throughout my life, I participated in band and music and choir. And so much so where after high school, I decided, yeah, I think I want to do this forever. So I attended high school at Shaker Heights High School. And then I went on to University of Dayton for my undergraduate degree. And I still was not, I did not have enough music after that. So I went on to receive my master's of trumpet performance from the University of Cincinnati College Conservatory of Music.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing all that. Now, I know you said you came of age in Greater Cleveland, graduated from Shaker Heights High School, sort of an eastern suburb of the city of Cleveland. But did you say also that you were a native Clevelander?
Yes, so before I transferred into the Shaker schools when my family moved, when I was about 9 years old in third grade. We grew up off of East 130th in Buckeye. And then when my brother was old enough to go to a different high school, we moved a bit. It's literally like around the corner. You know how Cleveland is, like you go, you can be in the suburbs, but 2 streets over, it's, you know, the Cleveland proper. So we moved 2 blocks over, and then I started going to the Shaker Heights public school system.
Okay. And I want to talk a little bit about maybe the distant past, as far as the history of your family is concerned. You're a native Clevelander, but do you know what attracted your ancestors to this part of the country?
Yeah, so both my parents were born and raised in Cleveland, Ohio, but their parents were both from the South. My father, so my grandfather, my dad's dad, is from Alabama, Montgomery, Alabama, and my mom's mom, my grandmother grew up in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And from what I understand, they both moved to the North like so many Black families did for a hopefully better opportunity. And so my family just stayed in the area.
Mhm. Do you have any childhood memories of going to the South, going back home? I hear a lot of, especially Alabama
Mhm.
natives or those who descended from people who are Alabama natives talk about going home for summer vacations. Is that part of your childhood as well?
Yeah, I never went to Alabama, but I think I can say I was maybe one of my grandmother's favorites. So so she used to every summer. My grandmother, my mom's mom, used to take me on a train ride to Chattanooga, Tennessee, to see my cousins. I have a huge family. I mean, my mother is one of 10 and my father is one of I think 9. So I have many uncles and aunties and cousins. So it was always fun for me to travel with my grandmother, being the only grandkid that she took with her on that long train ride from Cleveland to Chattanooga, to visit my cousins and my aunties and uncles down there. It was always a great time.
Okay, thank you again. Now you mentioned that your father was very active in music at church.
Mm.
So was he the minister of music or one of several staff musicians?
Yeah, so my father and I, growing up, we attended the Salvation Army for church. And if you're not so much familiar with Salvation Army, almost everything in the way that uh, the people that are a part of, it's based off of the military. So the director of music in the Salvation Army is called the bandmaster, and he was a bandmaster in the Salvation Army. So he would run the various music programs and he would conduct the youth bands and the other bands that we had in church. He also directed choir, which is probably I was in all of these things. We had a church choir and we would go to competitions. They were called Star Search, and we would prepare choir songs, and I performed solos. So yeah.
Vocal solos and instrumental solos?
Oh, so I never sang solos, but I did perform trumpet solos or cornet solos. And I participated in the choir for voice.
Wonderful. Now, thank you for telling me about that chapter in your family's history in Cleveland. I didn't know that
Yeah.
about Mr. James May Sr., but
Mhm.
thank you for sharing, even though it's not his interview. But I noticed that you have had the opportunity to study in, especially at the post-secondary level, outside of the city of Cleveland, but now you're back. Can you
Yeah.
tell us why you've chosen to remain in Greater Cleveland?
Yes. I this home in Cleveland was the first opportunity I received right after grad school. I remember throughout undergrad and graduate school, I had to work another job. So when I in my final year of grad school, I was working at Office Max nearly full time. And I had, you come to this railroad crossing where you could either keep doing what you're doing or you can venture off and try something else to see what happens. So for me at the time, it was I could stay in Cincinnati and keep working at Office Max and to see what happens, or I could, at the time, there was opening at Cuyahoga Community College. They were looking for a classical trumpet professor there. And so my choices was, yeah, Cincinnati or try teaching at the community college in Cleveland. They only had one student at the time that was interested in classical trumpet. So I just weighed my options, one student in Cleveland, no students in Cincinnati at the time. So I decided to move back home to Cleveland and, pound the pavement and see what other opportunities would arise.
Wonderful. Now, it's all about music. You know that when we say arts and culture and you're interviewing a trumpeter, it's all about music. But this second set of questions has a banner header, the place of music in your life. And that's sort of where you started. But I'd like for you to give us a description of your formal introduction to the study of
Mm,
music and the arts.
mm. So I say formally, to me, that really didn't start until I moved away. Until I went to undergrad, it was a whole new set of uh, habits and practice habits and studying habits. So before, everything music wise was just really fun, and it felt almost like an extracurricular to me all the time, even though I was doing music and in rehearsals and practices nearly every day. But as a kid, they just, things are just fun. um, and it wasn't until University of Dayton, I just had to get a little bit more serious and a little bit more purposeful about my practice habits, and really learned music theory for the first time, really, and understood kind of what it really meant to perform and be engaged all the time with music. And I think it just went a bit even further when I went to grad school. Actually, one of my mentors is still my undergraduate trumpet professor. He's like my second father. Whenever I have any musical accomplishments, I always text him like, "Hey, guess what? Guess what just happened? Guess where I'm playing?" So between my father and Dr. Reynolds was the name of my trumpet professor at University of Dayton. Those are my biggest two musical trumpet influencers, I think, for myself. And while at grad school, I didn't so much connect with anyone in the academic level, but I still have my family and my father, and I still had Dr. Reynolds that was in the general area. I went to Cincinnati, and Dr. Reynolds was in Dayton, which is not terribly far from Cincinnati.
All right. And you mentioned again a couple of names now for your most influential teachers, and even one a second dad.
Yeah.
But why would you say, in addition to what you've just shared, that these individuals that you've named so far
Mhm.
had such a powerful impact on your life?
Mm. I think the level of encouragement was there, obviously with my father and my mom. But in school, when I was away from my parents, Dr. Reynolds was always encouraging me to play and keep playing. And he heard something in my sound that he absolutely loved, and I am so appreciative of that. It's easy, I think, for me. I will say personally, as a Black student at a predominantly white institution, I felt lost for the first couple of years of undergrad, just being in that new larger space and not having any family or any friends there. I think you can just become invisible really quickly. But because of Dr. Reynolds, my trumpet teacher, I felt seen, and I felt like I had someone that at least wanted to get to know me a little bit more and saw the talent in me. I was way more reserved than I am now. So it was also, I think, harder for people to connect with me because I was just so quiet and shy at the time. So that was really meaningful to me and helped me to want to practice and keep going. And yeah.
Okay. Now, I'd like to ask about Cincinnati. For me, at least, growing up on America's North Coast, when the first time I drove to Cincinnati, I felt like I was leaving the country because it
Yeah.
took so long. And when you're used to looking at the shores of Lake Erie, and all of a sudden you're looking at the Ohio River and you can see a little bit of Kentucky, it
Yeah.
felt like a big change for me. And I
Yeah.
wonder, was it a culture shock for you to have different orientation, different body of water, and
Yeah.
then just to be able to see another state?
Yeah, it was different for me, and many of us, when you go away for that long, it just feels so different. So I think that added on to the complete feeling of newness and differentness. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, being in Cincinnati, I have to ask, this isn't on the script, but did you ever walk to Kentucky when you were in
I
Cincinnati?
I did not walk to Kentucky, but I did drive there across that bridge,
Yes.
several
Uh-huh.
times. Yeah. Yep.
Just had to ask. All right. Now, at this point in your life, having been mentored and inspired and raised by great teachers.
Mhm.
Would you describe yourself as a teacher primarily, or an artist, or a teaching artist? Which one of those might fit best for where you are right now?
Mm, That's a good question. I kind of ask myself the same thing from time to time because people often ask me that question. And I think the third option would be the most accurate, the teaching artist. On my website, I have like my statement as a teacher and artist, and I say how I think being a teacher definitely fuels my artistic and musician self, and vice versa. Where I don't think I would be as good as a musician, if I could say that without sounding like I'm talking about myself too much. But I don't think that I would be as good of a musician without my level of teaching experience that I have, and I don't think that I would be a good as good a teacher as I am without the performance experience that I have. It definitely kind of they feed each other.
Mhm. Um, Now, I'd like to shift gears just a little bit for a few minutes and talk about the challenges associated with making art or teaching music students
Mhm.
in the season of COVID-19 and Black Lives Matter. And so the first question under this heading is, how has your personal life and your work, how have they been impacted by COVID-19 and Black Lives Matter?
Mhm. Yeah. So teaching just became much more challenging for me. I'm used to it now, but going from in person, and I was literally never home very much because of teaching and performance. So to go from only being home a couple hours a day to being home all the time was a huge difference in my schedule and teaching. Teaching online, I went from lecturing in the classroom to having to lecture online with my laptop here. That got old pretty fast. It's really odd to just stare at a screen and lecture to college students for an hour at a time or so. It's kind of it was for me as a professor a little bit discouraging because you don't have that interaction and that face-to-face interaction while lecturing, and the eye contact. When you're on screen, the students for the most part had the option to turn their cameras off or to leave them on. So, most of the people chose to have their cameras off. And so imagine just talking to your screen full of names for an hour. Very, very challenging with not too much feedback often. With my private lesson studio, it was a bit better. I think the one-on-one teaching experience it's a little bit better with that. Um, but with teaching music, it comes the audio challenges where I'd have to have my students play one thing several times so I can really try to hear what was going on over there, and then connection issues. So as a whole, it was pretty challenging. I'm thankful now that I think for the most part that we are all more used to it, and we've probably all upped our technological equipment now. We've had to upgrade for many of us, so it's a bit better now. Another challenge with COVID was just the impact of the amount of students, and which affected my income for a while. Obviously, when you have a pandemic going on, the trumpet lessons are not the most important thing at the time. So I had many students that just had to end lessons or take a break because of financial reasons or otherwise. I know it was a really stressful time. So that was definitely understood. So I just had to kind of work through all these challenges along with the rest of the world. And yes, on top of that, Black Lives Matter, and just the same thing that most of us Black folk have been saying for our entire existence. but it felt like the things that we have been saying as Black people were just finally heard just a little bit during this time where everything stopped. So more ears had to listen to the things that we were saying. And it was during this time that more people gave me a platform to speak out and listen to me, which was helpful, but also, you know, a little bit stressful at the same time. But out of that came the Chromatic Brass Collective. It's a new organization that we started right after several Black citizens were murdered. We felt that we needed to come together to make this organization for Black and Brown people in the brass world and the music world. So from all the tragedies came some beautiful things.
Mhm. Yes, I read a little bit about that new organization on your website. Now, can you just give folks the web address? So they, if they Google your name, they're going to find out a lot about you. But can you tell people about what they're likely to find if they make their way to your website, in addition to finding out about the new group, about Black and Indigenous people of color,
Yeah.
and the music that you're making now in this season?
Yes. So on my website is Theresa May or TheresaMayTrumpet.com. That's just my first and last name, trumpet.com. And the new organization that I started is called the Chromatic Brass Collective. And that website can be reached at chromaticbrass.org. And on the website explains kind of how we formed and the purpose and the mission, which is to bring Black, Indigenous, people of color, women, and non-binary brass musicians. So we actually have a space that we can come and learn and encourage one another, because that is something that is extremely lacking in the music world still.
Hmm. Okay. And I was on a Zoom call a few weeks ago. I think I told you your name came up, right? I was so surprised. But there's a brilliant composer who's based in Chicago. Her name is also Regina. And I heard you perform one of her compositions, listening to the media on your website. So we're going to get people to your website, right, so they can experience all of this as well. You are not an unknown artist. People outside of certainly the city of Cleveland and state of Ohio are aware of your work. So thank you for what you're doing. You're making the hometown look very good. But tell us about this Regina in Chicago and how you came to know of her and her compositions.
Yeah. So in early 2020, it feels like a long time ago, but it wasn't that long ago. January 2020, I had an opportunity to curate and produce an event, and I entitled it Classic, New, Borrowed, and Blue. An organization at the time called Fresh Perspective, which was an organization founded by this oboe player, Devin Henzo. He attended the Cleveland Institute of Music and was generally unhappy with the state of the classical music scene in the city of Cleveland, and just realized that there was not many Black and Brown people represented, and wanted to offer an organization to help host musicians like me and many of the musicians around town that don't typically have a voice, to produce any event I wanted. And I had a budget and I could do what I wanted, and I took that and ran. So the event featured some of my composer friends. Ahmed Alabaka now lives in Chicago as well. There's a local composer at the time that lived here, Buck McDaniel. He composed a piece for me for brass trio and voice. And I have always been one to try to find music of people who looked like me. So women composers and Black composers was something that anytime I had a performance, I wanted to perform something that meant something to me, not just typical classical standards, because that rep has been played a lot. and it's great, but there is so much new music that's everywhere and out here. Um, so I was looking for music by Black composers and Black women composers. And Dr. Reynolds, my trumpet teacher, was like, hey, there's this book. Have you ever heard of it? It's called Brass Music of Black Musicians. And I hadn't heard of it. And he's such a great person. He mailed me the book. And I started just looking through. It's a really thick book as well. Like there's so many composers. And in that book of composers was Regina's piece, Regina Bayaki, Miles Per Hour. And I was like, this is great. It's an unaccompanied trumpet piece. And I normally do not play unaccompanied trumpet, but I played through it and I was like, yeah, this is great. I definitely want to play this. And whenever I play music of living composers, I like to let them know that I'm performing it just to make sure it's okay, that they have, I just like to make sure if you're playing someone's music, you should have enough respect to at least let them know if they're still living and make sure that everything surrounding it is okay. And from that, like now we have established a relationship and I was so happy to perform her piece. It was the very first piece I performed on the program. And yeah, that's how connections are made. And I'm so happy to be able to do that.
Okay, wonderful. And I don't think I'm being redundant in asking this question. I'm going to read it out loud. And if you say to me that you've already answered this question, then we'll move on to the next one. But I think there's more that can be said. So generally speaking, you've given me some of the specifics about how your teaching as a professor was impacted, staring at that screen or listening for your private students in your studio. But generally speaking, how have the performing arts and arts education been changed by COVID-19? And part two of that question is, do you believe that these changes will be with us for a while, even if they're not permanent? But how have those changes come about? What have you seen?
So I think the first thing that I realized is that there were way more virtual performances. And there was a time where there were just so many, kind of too many, but we were all just trying to figure it out and still trying to find a way to be able to perform, even though we could not be and share the spaces with people. So the amount of virtual performances happened. I think now versus when we first started, the level of quality is much improved now. Again, that we're all learning more and more each day about virtual performances. I think that there are people who were discouraged to a point where they actually stopped creating. I know many students now that schools are reopening, the band programs are struggling more now because students had not played and not wanted to participate in music or band for the past year because band was not really banned. They couldn't gather in the band room and they had to gather online, and you can't play 40 students can't play on a Zoom call together. It doesn't really work. So I think a lot of music programs are struggling, trying to get students to kind of reconsider starting again. As professional musicians, we're still in the struggle right now. All events are not completely back. I know even with one of the bands I play in, Morning at Black Star, we had tours lined up. We recently thought we'd be able to do another just kind of a short week tour in September of 2021. And that week has now reduced to 2 days. So many establishments are not welcoming live music anymore. We kind of just have to go with the flow and see what happens with COVID. It's still a very, very pertinent thing that's here with us still. So just trying to survive with that. Um, it's, I guess, on the pro side of things, I think that there are several organizations that have started because we had more virtual collaborations. I did so many virtual collaborations during this time, and I think people felt much more comfortable reaching out to someone across the world to ask if they wanted to, do a song together or a tune together. So that is one of the really great positive things that came out of COVID. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned this idea of reaching across the world to collaborate with
Yeah.
another artist. And so, bridging an ocean or two, crossing a continent, and there you are. You've got a colleague on the other side of the world.
Yeah.
But I wanted to talk a little bit more about travel. We talked about your travel from the North Coast to the South Coast of the state of Ohio, but has travel regionally, nationally, or internationally really played an important part in your career as well?
Yes, all the travels. I think that was part of the desire of me to be a musician. I love traveling. The first time I traveled and performed was actually with the Salvation Army. I played in the Salvation Army Youth Band. It's a brass band, and we went to Scandinavia and Sweden. I was I don't remember how old I was. Maybe I was 16, sometime around there. But it was great. And I remember in my head thinking, I don't think I said it out loud, but I remember thinking, wow, this is amazing. I'm in a different country and I'm playing my cornet and I'm playing music with all these people. And one of my most favorite things to do is to collaborate with people and play with other people. So I had a chance to do that at a young age. And ever since then, I've just really, really enjoyed it. I've been to the high school when I was in the marching band. We went to Paris. Again, another opportunity for me to perform. Morning at Black Star, we performed at the Kennedy Center, and we're hoping to be able to travel to Berlin in the near future. So I realized that just music can take you places that, I don't know, maybe if I had a different job, that wouldn't be something that came with the territory. Um, but yes, being able to perform and play with people from everywhere and different audiences was definitely something that kept me in the field.
Okay. I'd like to ask also about the influence of the Salvation Army. When I talk to a lot of musicians of color, especially African descended peoples, they'll talk about the role of the Black church
Mhm.
and Black sacred music in shaping their worldview.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering because I've never attended a worship service with the Salvation Army. We know some of us about the thrift stores that
Yeah.
are associated with Salvation Army. I'm a bargain hunter.
Yeah.
We know something perhaps about the holiday giving
Mhm.
for the Salvation Army, but to talk about the Salvation Army as a church, I don't get to have those conversations a lot. And I study religion and spirituality in the history of Africa and the diaspora. And here you are, African American woman, product of the Salvation Army religious experience. But what was that like growing up in that musical environment as a young Black girl?
Mm. And so I have to say that the Salvation Army I attended was probably very unlike many of the Salvation Armies around the world. I went to the Salvation Army that was on East 93rd in Miles. It's in the Black neighborhood, and we were predominantly a Black congregation. And most of the time we had Black pastors. The way that the Salvation Army works is that every couple of years they switch pastors around, so they travel every couple of years. But we were known as the Miles Park Corps, like all the churches are all corps. And we were, I'm pretty sure, I hope I'm not lying, but I'm pretty sure we were like the oldest Black church in the Salvation Army. There was like us at the time. There was also a core in Huff on Superior. So there were just a couple of us Salvation Army churches that were Black. So I felt like I knew, and I did know, like all the Black hymns. Like we did that type of music at the Salvation Army. We did do brass band music, but we also were singing and playing the traditional Black hymns that you hear if you went to an Antioch Baptist church, right? So I feel like I had a similar experience as if I would have grown up straight Baptist or Methodist.
Well, thank you for, again, you taught me a lot. I didn't realize, and I don't know why, that there was a Salvation Army congregation
Mhm.
in a facility at 93rd and Miles.
Yep.
Yes. Are
It's
they still together?
there. They are still there. I am no longer in the Salvation Army, so I've not been there since I was about in high school or so, at least college. But the building is still there. I live not too far from it, so I'll pass it every now and then, and the building is still there. Yep.
Wonderful. Now, you mentioned the Antioch Baptist Church, and I always preface that by saying the historic
Yes.
Antioch
Yeah.
Baptist Church with more than 100 years
Yeah.
of history making here in the heart of Black Cleveland on the East Side. That's actually where I met Mr. James May, your dad. So, can you tell me why the name of that church came to mind when we were talking about the Black religious experience musically?
Yes, because I've attended that church a couple times with my father, and they have multiple choirs at the time when I was attending, and the music is there. And then, man, I can't remember the name of the woman who plays piano. She always had those like white framed glasses, or maybe they would be different colors, whatever matched her outfit. And at Miles Park, we had Miss Jackson, Gloria Jackson, who would play the piano. And, she was easily gospel influenced. So the way that she played the hymns were likened to the way that the pianist at Antioch Baptist pianist played those keys there. It was the same vibe for me, just on a larger, much larger scale.
Yeah, I believe the pianist at Antioch Baptist Church that you're referring to is Mother Helen Turner Thompson.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Here's how I know I'm dating myself when I say to her, it's like she's got these Elton John like glasses, right? I don't know if you remember Elton John when he was in the glasses phase.
Yep.
That was
Like,
the 70s.
yeah. I remember. Well, I mean, I wasn't, alive, but I remember pictures.
Okay. I'm holding in my hand the latest issue of Opera News, right? And I'm not the aficionado, but I love certain African descended opera divas, including the late, great Jessie Norman. And so I subscribed, and of course, Leontine Price, who is still with us.
Yeah.
But I subscribed because I just fell in love with the voices of those women. But for this issue, do you have a copy of this?
I
Do you
don't.
recognize this guy, this Terrence?
Yeah.
Yeah, Terrence Blanchard, the
Yep.
composer and jazz icon, arrives at the Met. Is this a big deal? Tell me why.
It's a huge deal. I mean, so opera, I will just put that in the whole category of classical music as a whole. Whenever I perform classical music, I'm normally the only Black person in the space, in the orchestra, in the audience. So to have opera, who the genre is largely still not super inclusive, and you won't see a ton of Black people or brown people in those spaces. So to have a Terrence Blanchard, who's already done so many things in so many different areas of music. So to have them in that genre, in that space, it's super meaningful. And it starts with representation. And so if I'm seeing that someone that is my similar hue can take up space in that area, then it makes me feel like it's something that I can do, and it's something that is attainable and reachable.
Mhm. You know, he's standing here with his hands in his pocket, no
Mhm.
instrument. So
Mhm.
Ken, for those of us who may be reviewing this video and listening to the audio, and you're not playing your instrument right now either, but can you tell me what instrument he plays, and why you think he has made his way finally to the Met?
Mhm.
I don't suppose they just threw the doors open and said, y'all come, but what has he been doing, before 2021 that in this season, he's going to the Met?
Yes, I know it's so crazy because sometimes you just look up and see what a person is doing without realizing all the other things that they've done. But so Terrence Blanchard is an amazing, accomplished trumpet player. He was actually in Cleveland maybe 2-3 years ago by now, and I got a chance to meet him, and I made sure to take a picture with him to document that time. But yes, he's written a bunch of music. He's done film scoring. He's written opera music, but he's worked with the one director, man, my memory with names, but he's worked with Black movie directors of clearly names I can't remember right now, and just forging his own path as a ridiculously great performer and composer. And he's shown that he is capable of performing and writing for many different genres of music, which is why they're like, yes, we know who you are. You've done all these things before, and we want you, your music and your opera. So
Yeah, I was somewhat familiar with his music because of his work with Spike Lee.
yes, that's what I was trying to think of. Yep.
Uh-huh. But it's just, but to hear that he was going to be the first at the Met, that caught me off guard. I'm sure you already know that A. Grace Lee Mims is Spike Lee's aunt.
Yeah.
Well, or was the
Yep.
late A. Grace Lee Mims. Her brother, Bill
Mhm.
Lee, is Spike's dad.
Yeah.
And so, I see all these wonderful paths crossing now, not
Yeah.
intersecting lines, but people who've been on a journey for a very long time in
Mhm.
the arts and culture. And then all of a sudden it comes together in this moment.
Yeah.
And I'm just hoping we can keep ourselves healthy, right? Do what we need to do
Yep.
so that this opera can do what I believe it can do, to open minds,
Yep.
perhaps get people listening to some of the other things that he's done. But I don't know. When I ask, is this a big deal? I'm reacting to it like it's a big deal because I know him from doing other things. But yeah, I think he's bringing, or this piece has the potential to
Mhm.
bring a lot of different audiences
Yeah.
together. But
Yes.
that's me. I'm not a musician. I just like music.
So I think you're completely on point, and I hope with that there is, more Black and brown faces that are performing. And I want to mention that I remember, maybe it was 6 years ago. It's the first time I played with an all Black orchestra, and it was the Color of Music Festival. I had an opportunity to perform with them, and then I've been performing with them ever since. They do it once a year or so. Um, I remember that was something that I did not know I needed until after that whole experience was over, because as a classical musician, I'm classically trained. I thought I wanted to play in an orchestra full time, but that was, well, save that for another segment. But but I realized that that was not something for me at the time. But being able to play classical music, which I love, in a sea of other people that could easily be my cousins, and understand our hairstyles and the way that we talk, and being not afraid to listen to the type of music that I like, but still understanding that we can like our music and like classical music. It was such a freeing experience. And I felt like, okay, yeah, I need this. This is great. So I feel like Terence Blanchard's opera will have that similar effect for audiences like me that will see that.
All right, thank you. Now, I am trying to make eye contact with you virtually, right? I think I'm
Yeah.
staring at the green dot, but I think I see one of my contemporaries, a picture of him on your wall. Is that Prince on the wall back
Yeah.
there? Yeah.
Yeah.
So how did he end up on your wall? Is there a
uh,
story that goes with this?
well, I'm a huge fan of Prince, and I'm also a huge fan of art, and purchasing art from people that I know personally, and from Cleveland. But my cousin is a really, really fantastic artist, Rakaya. So when he passed away, that I was like, all right, I need some prints on my wall, and I asked my cousin if she would paint him for me, and that's what she came up with, and I absolutely love it.
Again, your cousin who's the visual artist, what is her name?
Rakaya.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And I'm coming to the end of my list of questions, and I thank you so much for being so cooperative, because your
Yeah.
participation in this oral history interview is completely voluntary, and you didn't have to answer any of these questions, but I'm very glad that you were willing to answer them all so far. But here's one that I hope you will also answer, and it is this one. What are your thoughts on public funding for the arts in this moment, especially when there are so many competing interests at the time, including healthcare, the environment, and political unrest at home and abroad?
Hmm. So with funding, and I guess I was not not too knowledgeable about the ins and outs of funding until the Chromatic Brass Collective. It seems really cumbersome to receive funding. I also could just be because I'm not a fan of paperwork, and there is so much paperwork involved with receiving funding. So that's something. Another thing is I know from performing for organizations who largely receive their budgets through funding and grants. It's way too strict in terms of, yes, we'll give you money, but you have to perform this composer's music, or we'll give you the money, but you have to perform classical music, or we'll give you money, but whatever other reasoning or rules that they want to give you, instead of just allowing the arts organizations to choose what they really want to use the money for. I think that ties up a lot of money, and it's just ridiculous. It's kind of like saying, we'll give you money, but we don't trust you in your organization to do with it what you're supposed to. I think that is a huge wall, and it's just not conducive to art. Those are my biggest qualms with funding and even grants to a certain point. I literally had a conversation with the organization who is attempting to do a more diverse planning, which everyone is saying they want to do right now. But when it came to what they could actually do, they could not do whatever diverse programming they were asking for because of the type of funding they were previously receiving. So it's just too complicated and too cumbersome, in my opinion.
Okay. Um, do you believe that an over reliance on public funding, as cumbersome as it can be, stifles creativity? Or do we see creative geniuses out there just doing it without the funding?
Mm, yes. So yes and yes. I do think relying heavily on specific funding can stifle um, organizations and musicians. And I also think that because of that, many artists have found other ways by like crowdfunding and other ways to support their own projects. Because I mean, as an artist, I feel like there's nothing worse than someone telling you how to do your art. Yeah, that's really not the way. Yes.
Are you ever confronted by people saying, well, why should we give a grant to this composer? When there are people in East Cleveland, for example, who can't access the COVID-19 vaccine. I mean,
Mhm.
are we choosing between the arts and our lives, or are the arts enriching our lives? Is it an either or kind of proposition here? But
Yeah.
and I
So
ask because I've heard those things. So I'm
yeah,
wondering if you're hearing them as a musician.
yeah. So I actually heard that exact thing really when I was we still are. We're fundraising right now for the Chromatic Brass Collective, and I had posted on Facebook about the fundraiser, and someone commented, why would I give money to your organization when there are people dying? There are so many organizations and causes that we as individual people can support. So if you choose to support one cause over another, that's fine, but that should not take away from all the other causes that are helpful in the world. I'm not too sure why some people believe that you can only support one thing at a time. Also, I really believe that if you don't have anything nice to say, that you should just not say anything. And that clearly is something that maybe people don't believe that anymore as a whole. But yeah.
I think I told you a little bit, and we're getting close to the end of my list of questions, but thank you so much for your time. I think I told you about the Zoom calls that I've been participating in. That's where I met Regina Harris, and now I'm thinking about her last name with all those beautiful vowels, and I would say Biaki.
Bayaki, yeah.
Biaki. It's a long I. Okay.
Yes.
I won't make that mistake again, right? I've been calling her Regina, but Regina Biaki. And
Yes.
in case there's another Regina Harris out there, we've got to
Yes.
put that
Yes.
surname there and find this brilliant composer.
Mhm.
But there have been some incredible people on these calls, just like her. Not
Mhm.
necessarily in her generation, because she's a younger composer. When I think about myself, and I know that Regina's younger than this Regina. There was a brilliant composer on the call one week. His name was TJ Anderson.
Mhm.
And he said, and I believe he has just donated his papers to Harvard. He asked the question about the funding. What do you do? If you believe that you have to have this grant in order to make this music,
Mhm.
what do you do if you don't get the grant?
Mhm.
He says, you make the music anyway.
Yes.
And I thought, oh, I'm so sorry I'm not recording this. But I'm hoping that musicians across generational
Yeah.
lines are seeing it that way. But again, I'm somewhat concerned. I also heard, to your point about the band room and not being able to gather there, but there's PPE now
Mhm.
for bands.
Yeah.
What is that? How do you do that? How do you
Yeah.
play trumpet with PPE?
That's a great question. So I had to do that. I can't not remember when, but within this year at some point, um, I performed in the musical and things were still, we're still not out of the clear right now. So, 4 months ago, we were not either. So for this musical, instead of having it live and having the musicians with the the singers and the actors, the musicians had to record the entire music for the musical, and the singers would sing with the recorded track of us. But even in the sessions where we recorded the music, I had to wear a mask with the hole in it. So I put the mouthpiece of the trumpet through that whole opening in the mask. And I also had to use a bell cover, and it's just a little piece of thin fabric that goes over the end of the trumpet to help prevent the spread of any aerosols spreading through the air. We're also spread out. So by now, most instruments are able to have a bell cover and or have a mask where you can play your instrument with the mask. So it is a challenge, but I think we're all just doing whatever we can to still be able to create and make music with other people.
Okay. So I've never seen this bell cover, so I'm going to ask this question. Does it act like it's a mute, right? That's what you call it when you put it in the bell and it sort of muffles the sound. Is it called a mute?
Yes, we have things that are called mutes, and the bell covers does act in the same fashion. Yep.
Oh, so it changes the sound.
Does change the sound a bit. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Not as much as with actual mutes, but it does change. It changes the feeling when I'm playing. It kind of makes it feel a bit more restricted. And it makes things a bit softer and a little bit muffled as well. And intonation is a whole other bag of fun.
Now, is this something, the bell cover and the mask with the hole in it, is this something that came about as a result of COVID-19, or were people doing these things before to try to, during flu season, to remain healthy?
For the most part, this all came about due to COVID. I'd say the only difference would be if you've ever seen a marching band with the marching tubas, sometimes with their big old, the holes are covered with fabrics and they have like pictures or maybe a letter or spells out something. Other than that, everything else has been new for us.
Okay. That would make a difference.
Makes a huge difference. Yeah, I had to practice just in this little office here, just practicing with the bell cover and with the mask with the hole, because that also it makes it a bit different. So I had to get used to playing that way.
Okay. Well, I have actually come to the end of the hour. We have 1 minute left, and I have one question or
Perfect.
yeah, this is my final question.
Okay.
Is there anything else that you would like to say about arts and culture in your life?
Sure. I like to leave it with the fact that I hope the things that have come out of COVID, the positive things that have come out concerning people of color and arts and creative, continue to get better, even as things go back to normal, as people like to say. I hope that our voices as Black people in the arts world are still actively heard and actively sought out to be listened to. And I hope that we are continued to receive the space and time and opportunity to talk about things that impact us.
Well, thank you so much for sharing with us your life story, your musical journey from the North Coast of America to the South Coast, right, of the state of Ohio and all around the world and back to Greater Cleveland. So thank you so much for that. I'll have to thank Mr. James May for doing such a great job, getting you hooked on the trumpet. We're going to thank Regina also for mentioning your name and being excited about your music and the things that you're doing here in Ohio. and not being jealous because she's in Chicago. And, there's just so many things that I'm thankful for as far as this project is concerned. I certainly appreciate the honor, the respect that you've given to your teachers and your mentors, because Grace Mims was that kind of teacher for me,
Mhm,
right?
mhm.
And I'm going to thank Jania Stegall for
Yes,
referring me to you. I think she's doing incredible work at the Cleveland
yes,
Institute of Music, and I'm so glad that your paths have crossed.
yes.
So again, and did your path cross with hers at the Institute of Music?
Oh, so we both attended Cincinnati Conservatory of Music.
Okay,
Yeah, so yeah, we went there. So and then years later, she's here.
this
Yeah.
is wonderful. But yes, she's just touching a lot of lives, doing incredible work, and I'm
Yes.
grateful for that. But thank you again. Have a wonderful weekend. What's left of it. We
Mhm.
look forward, all of us, right? Those of us who love the arts, to the time when we can gather in concert halls, at the Institute of Music, at Severance Hall, home of the best band in the land, all those other great venues in Cleveland where we can hear live music once again. You take
Yes.
care.
Thank you very much.